You want to talk about one of the most beloved conferences in all of college football. We officially found it here in the crossroads of the United States, taking a look at the MACtion as we continue our 2025 preseason deep dive series where we will go through every single conference and also provide that 50,000 feet perspective on every single team in college football as we prepare to embark on the 2025 season. So hopefully you guys have been enjoying the series, the first series that we have brought to the College Football Redzone channel as we are approaching the start of college football season. As we're approaching the 30-day mark as the recording of this video of college football coming our way officially, and it could not be here soon enough. But in the meantime, if you guys have been enjoying this series, I need you guys to do me a couple of administrative favors real quick. If you haven't done so already, make sure you go ahead and hit that like button as it lets me know that you are really enjoying the content that comes out of this channel for specifically the 2025 preseason deep dive series, as there was a lot of work that happened in the background in order to make this happen in the first place. And then it also, secondarily, it warms my cold dead heart, so I would truly appreciate that. And then also as well, if you're brand new to the channel, you enjoy the college football content, and you're excited for College Football Red Zone kicking off on August 30th, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as we're going to certainly not missing any major college football action throughout the season. The streams on Saturday are gonna feed families and feed generations. We're bringing the idea of Red Zone, bringing that to college football. You know, we're not gonna lie here on the channel. We're excited for it. So go ahead and do a couple of those things real quick as we go ahead and talk about. Let's go ahead and talk about this conference from a high level perspective before we go into the team specific rankings. So, listen, this is a conference that is famous for the midweek action that it's famous for. The first conference to really introduce those games being played in the middle of the week, whether it be a random Wednesday night or a Thursday night. You know, those snow games in the middle of the week just really brings the joy to my heart. Famously known as MACtion, obviously, right? But then also, you know, to take a look at some of the teams in this conference, there's an intriguing pool of teams here. You got some emerging coaches in this conference, which this was a conference that has always produced some high-level coaches. Nick Saban, for example, one of the best of all time, started out in the MAC. So it really has turned into this cradle of coaches. Matt Campbell, if you're looking for a little bit more of a recent example, now coaching at Iowa State and has done a fantastic job of turning that Iowa State program. He started out in Toledo, I believe. So this has always been a cradle of coaching staff, given how even the resources typically are between each of the MAC schools. Really the least amount of discrepancy compared to any other conference in college football, and that still even holds up today. You have an intriguing pool of veteran talent, you know, on most of these teams, as well as some programs that, you know, are looking to get more than just local attention and looking to capture our hearts on the national stage as well. Whether it is a team like Toledo, who, you know, outlasted Pitt in the bowl game last season, or maybe more notably beat Mississippi State handily during non-conference play. And of course, all the talk that we've heard throughout this offseason as well, we talk a lot about how conference realignment has been shaking up the national landscape. It seems like that's all we talk about sometimes in the offseason, but the MAC has been a really stable place. Yes, there's going to be a couple of changes, and, you know, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but overall, this is a conference that is certainly one of the most stable in the entirety of college football. But as we get a little bit closer to getting those team rankings out to you guys, we are definitely taking an eye out for Toledo, as they're going to enter as your favorites once again. But at the same time, I think the gap is certainly narrowing at the top of the conference. Miami is looking to be a really good team this year, as well as the defending conference champions in the Ohio Bobcats. They are certainly not going to lie down quietly in terms of their conference title defense, which starts now. And I think they have a legitimate chance of making some things shake. But there's also some really intriguing teams in this conference, whether it be a Buffalo or a Bowling Green, both with relatively new coaching staffs. Bowling Green in particular bringing in Eddie George in the middle of the offseason, well after the end of the spring transfer portal period. And then Pete Lambeau as well. Pete Lambeau hasn't been there too terribly long, maybe in his second or third season, but already showing to be one of the finer coaches in this conference. And then speaking of those coaches changes, you do have some more coaches such as at Ball State and Kent State trying to inject new energy into their programs, possibly new questions, which we'll definitely talk about in a minute. And we have a second act. Yes, we have a second act within the MAC as UMass makes its triumphant return after venturing into the landscape of being an FBS independent for the last decade. So we have UMass coming in. A team is going to be departing. Northern Illinois is going to departure at the end of this year. But for now, this is going to be a 13-team outfit. Long-term looking to be a 12-teamer, unless we do receive some more conference realignment news, which as of right now, we haven't heard anything of recent. So for now, that stability is still going to remain. But, with a mix of gritty defenses, some high-octane offenses thrown in there, and the MAC is always famous for creating some random late-season drama late in the year as well. I think it's going to be a very chaotic but a compelling campaign within the MAC. But with that being said, as we get closer to the race to Detroit, where the MAC championship is held, home of the Detroit Lions, let's go ahead and now jump into our team-by-team rankings. And I think this first team that I'm going to mention, I don't think it's going to be any major surprise. But coming in at number 13, I do have the Golden Flashes at Kent State. And not only do I believe that this is the worst team in the conference, at least for right now as we start to get rolling into the season, the Golden Flashes are, it seems, really the consensus pick to be the worst team in college football at the FBS level in terms of, major collegiate athletics, because for good reason, this is a team that has gone 1-23 over the course of the last 2 seasons, with that one win going up against a Division AA program, otherwise known as the FCS. So really, this team has not won a FBS matchup since, I believe, 2022. And through it all, it's just a bizarre situation with the coaching, head coaching thing, because Kenny Burns was extended originally in spite of going 1-23, but their hand was forced after an investigation showed that, Kenny Burns had some questionable purchases on a credit card that ultimately led to his downfall. So for at least the course of this year, we are going to see an interim coach in place. The national coaching search for 26 and beyond is currently underway. But speaking of the team itself, to be frankly honest with you, there isn't too much to be excited about. One of the few bright spots that they did have in Christian McCray, he entered the transfer portal. He, of course, is no longer with the team because of that. And this was also a defense that allowed over 44 points per game last season. And they're going to be slated to have question marks all over the field once again, which huge reasons why this is the worst team in major college football, in my opinion. But ironically enough, I think things are shaping out for Kent State, where even though this is the worst team in college football, in my opinion, I think they're going to improve at the very least. I don't see this being a team that is going to fail to win a single game once again. And matter of fact, I think there is a world where they actually could win more than a couple games. I think 4-8 is very reachable. They do have the FCS matchup against, I believe it's Merrimack, which I always give the FBS program benefit of the doubt, with Merrimack not being at least a top-tier FCS program. So it's a game that Kent State should win in theory, especially with that game happening at home. But then you look at the MAC conference schedule specifically for this Golden Flashes squad, and there's a few home games on there that certainly can be interesting. They have UMass at home, which we'll touch on them in a little bit, but I think that actually could be a game where Kent State should be favored, ironically enough, against the Minutemen. And then you also have Bowling Green and Central Michigan coming into your building. And thanks to that home field advantage, just from both of those teams having to travel to play you instead of having to go play them at their stadiums, I think that home field advantage at least gives them a puncher's chance to win both of those games as well. Although, albeit the BG and Central Michigan games, I think they would still be underdogs in, but at least be at a point where hey, the upset wouldn't be a complete shocker, right? So I do have them being a little bit better, winning a couple of those games, winning the Merrimack game, as well as probably that UMass ball game as well. Once you start getting into the thick of conference play, it's going to take some time for the Golden Flashes to get out of the basement. I think there is a very clear understanding from that standpoint, just because of what happened the last couple of years, and really they're still looking for who their permanent head coach is going to be moving forward. Speaking of the UMass Minutemen, I do want to talk about them next, though, because I just so happen to have them as my 12th team in my power rankings going into the college football season. Now, UMass, I think, is going to be served really well by just them being in a conference again. I think what we've learned from this experience that this is not a program that was meant to be independent. They need some kind of structure from a scheduling standpoint, and hopefully this move long term gives them a little bit more of a identity moving forward, and I think those will be beneficial for the MAC as well, as it opens up the door for if you want to expand out in the northeastern part of the country, you can do that as you have more of a segue with UMass being a part of your conference now. But as for this year, the new head coach in Joe Harrismiak, he's only going to have a handful of stars returning from a team that was one of the worst in college football once again. So I'm very hopeful for this program moving forward, but as of right now, I don't have UMass much better. I do only have them winning one game, which also is against an FCS opponent, but this is the team that I think has more potential, at least, than what Kent State does. I think they're certainly capable of winning that Kent State game on the road, but then they also have Western Michigan and Bowling Green at home, which are winnable games in my opinion for the Minutemen, even though I don't have them winning those ball games. Plus, you have the Temple Owls coming into your building as well for week number 1. Should be a very intriguing matchup, especially if you happen to come across the American breakdown, where it's the bottom of the MAC going up against the bottom of the American. Both teams with new coaching staffs, and are going to be looking to try to make that 1-0 start certainly possible. So this is a team that I think could certainly flirt with a potential bowl game, and even surpass even my highest expectations for UMass. So I do have them at 1-11, but they can certainly be a scrappy team and be one of those teams that's better than what the record truly shows. I think that's certainly possible for the UMass Minutemen. As now we go to another program that is looking to get a new coaching staff into the building, and that's the Ball State Cardinals. You know, we saw the worst team in college football in my power ratings, the second worst team in college football already revealed. You see Ball State revealed as my third worst. They come in at 134 overall, which, you know, it might be a little bit spicy of a take. You can make a case with just how bad the bottom of this conference is you could really make the argument, if it wasn't for, you know, a little bit more talent at the top, you know, with your, you know, your Miamis, Ohios, Buffaloes, and Toledos, this could be a worse conference than Conference USA in 2025, just with how bad the bottom is. But reverting to the conversation, back to the Ball State Cardinals real fast, though, they're facing an uphill battle. They are only having a handful of returning starters from last year, and then they also lose Caden Somoza, who was a bright spot for this Cardinals team last year. They lost him in the transfer portal as well, so new head coach Mike Umovich is going to have his work cut out for him a little bit in terms of rebuilding this program from the ground up. I do have them both being a little bit better than what we have for Kent State and UMass combined, but really not much better though. Still able to win a few games. The Akron and Eastern Michigan matchups are going to be intriguing, so I think there's a little bit of wiggle room to possibly get up to 4 wins, but really not expecting much out of Ball State, as they're trying to really start from essentially from scratch, as Caden Somoza went to Tulane, and ironically enough, excuse me, I'm recording this the same day as the news that broke that Jake Redsoff is transferring into Tulane as a walk-on. So he left the starting gig at Ball State, and he's now no longer even guaranteed to be the starter. We'll see what happens there. Just just a funny side note really happening there in for this Ball State program. Hopefully better days are ahead, but not expecting a lot in 2025. As for another program that hopefully will have better days ahead of it, I do have Akron coming up next at number 10. Listen, Joe Moorhead, he's doing an admirable job. He is doing everything possible to get Akron out of really the college football basement. Losing your best players to the portal consistently, and then you now have the APR suspension. That's going to continue to hold this program back. Granted, this was a team going into the offseason that was carrying some momentum. They were really playing their best ball in the second half of the season, and really thought that this was going to be a step forward. But what happened throughout the rest of the offseason is just really tough to watch. So that's why I have them going a similar record in last year, because it seems like that momentum was stifled a little bit. They do have Ben Finley at least coming back. He's an experienced starting quarterback, and really the first team on this list that has some continuity from last season, and could even sneak into a bowl game if they can pull off an insane upset along the way. Well, actually, no, they can't go to a bowl game, but they can get to 500. That can still certainly happen. They still have a lot of pride that they can certainly play for. 5 wins is certainly possible. I think realistically they split the Central Michigan or the Ball State game on the road. I don't think they win both of them, but it's certainly possible that they can win both of those games and again be flirting with 500 in that 5-7 range. 4-8 would still not be terrible, as on the surface it looks like it could be a lost season for Akron, but at the same time I'm sure Joe Moorhead is going to find a way to at least continue to try to build some momentum as they get into 26, where hopefully you raise those APR scores enough to where as a program you can be eligible again. Meanwhile, continuing our trip into the top 10, the next 3 schools ironically are all the directional Michigan schools. So we'll start with number 9 of, I guess, the worst of the Michigan directional schools. In Central Michigan, we have a brand new era happening at Central Michigan's campus, right? Matt Drinkle now comes over after achieving some success as the offensive coordinator at Army, as well as being a head coach at Kansas Wesleyan, ironically enough. Does that based on his offensive mind. So hopefully that unlocks some of the potential that could be brewing on this Chippewa's offense. Just really the $1 million question is, when you're bringing in someone that doesn't have any head coaching experience at the Division I level prior to him taking the Central Michigan job, is, can he succeed as a head coach at the FBS level? We see some of these out-of-box hires, and, certainly bringing in someone whose last head coaching stop was at Kansas Wesleyan, who I believe is an NAIA school, not even a part of the NCAA institutional association, can certainly, it's a risky hire. I will say that. So we'll wait and see what happens here, but at least in year number 1, I think Matt Drinkle's team is going to be fine. Given how the conference is structured overall, being in that similar range as Akron, who we previously talked about, except maybe a little bit lower of a floor because there is some more toss-ups that you got to throw in there. not only do you have Eastern Michigan at home, which, could be a season-defining type of game, especially for the Eagles, which we'll definitely talk about soon, but, playing Akron and Kent State on the road could create some wonky things, especially if, maybe they're taking them for granted just because of how much of a dumpster fire, particularly Kent State, has been over the past couple of years. So definitely some games to watch out for the Chippewas. But again, another team that I think could go and be a potentially bowl eligible type of team, or at least flirt with the idea of bowl eligibility, but we'll have to wait and see there. Then we move on over to the Eastern Michigan Eagles, and Eastern Michigan, again, just like with many teams in this modern era of college football, we are going to see a significant number of new faces throughout this entire starting lineup. But I think what a lot of the country doesn't know is that I think Chris Creighton is an underrated coach who knows how to get the best out of his players. The power rating model says that there isn't a ton of talent on this roster. We have them as the 123rd best team in the country, and we have them going 4-8, but this is a team that genuinely would not surprise me if they were able to, reach their biggest potential and again get to bowl eligibility, just like how they were a bowl eligible team last year. But in order to make that bowl eligibility happen, there is a good number of games, especially in conference action, that they're going to have to take care of. I think they're going to have to win at least 5 conference games in order to have a realistic shot of being bowl eligible. And particularly in those 5 games in particular, I'm looking at the road games against Central Michigan and Ball State. Always tricky to win on the road, no matter where you're going. And then at home, you have Northern Illinois, Bowling Green, and Western Michigan. All teams that I would have as slightly better than this Eastern Michigan Eagle squad, but at home, anything can certainly happen. So it's really going to come down to, can you win all 5 of those games that I talk about? And if you can, I think Eastern Michigan will be a bowl team. I think more realistically, though, you do see them drop a couple of those games, maybe particularly the Northern Illinois matchup, or even the Bowling Green matchup could be losable for sure, but definitely something to monitor. It's going to be all about conference play, for many of these teams that are, looking to have bowl aspirations, that's for sure. Now, speaking of new faces, we now move on to number 7, the last of the directional Michigan schools for right now, and that's going to be Western Michigan, who is going to need several new faces that they brought in through the transfer portal and have been developing through the high school recruiting ranks. They're going to need them to contribute right away in order to be successful. Now, there's some good news here, as Jalen Buckley and Blake Bosma, they're both back, and they are both ready to lead this Western Michigan offense in 2025. An intriguing offense for the Broncos as they embark on this new college football campaign as the 7th best team in the MAC, who again is, has that capability of being a just a solid MAC team, flirt with that bowl eligibility like a couple of other teams that we mentioned on the list. Yes, they certainly will not have as high of a ceiling as Eastern Michigan, in my opinion, but you want to talk about a program that maybe has the highest floor that we have seen so far. I think Western Michigan at least has a little bit of a higher floor than most of the teams that we've already discussed. Listen, if they want to make bowl eligibility happen, surpass my expectations, though, they got 2 road games against UMass and Eastern Michigan. I think they're going to have to win both of them, but we'll have to wait and see what happens when the games are actually decided on the field. This now takes us into the upper echelon of the MAC now, because we're now approaching the top 5. But before we even get to the top 5, we got to talk about number 6, and that is the Bowling Green Falcons, bringing in a brand new head coach late in the offseason cycle, well after both the winter and spring transfer portal window, with their head coach leaving for the NFL. But give credit to Ed George. He's able to at least bring in at least an adult in the room and Drew Pine, who's going to help stabilize the floor of this offense while they're trying to figure out what the long-term option is going to be at the quarterback position. There's certainly some other intriguing pieces to keep an eye out for as well. Again, I think because of all the changes and really Eddie George getting a late start, it might be similar to the Kalen DeBoer situation in Alabama last year when Nick Saban decided to retire after the transfer portal windows. Granted, a lot more talent on the roster, but Bowling Green, doesn't obviously have that same luxury. So it could be a little bit of growing pains in year number one under Eddie George, but a team that I actually do think is capable of going to a bowl game. But I have them going 5-7. I think they drop one of either the Kent State or UMass game on the road. Then they also have Eastern Michigan on the road. And Chris Creighton, I talked about him earlier, very good coach. Someone that, he knows how to win in spite of having the second best roster on the field, per se. So Eddie George is going to have some interesting coaching matchups that he's going to have to deal with in year number one after coming over from Tennessee State, where he was originally coaching at. So I have Bowling Green as my 117th team in the nation going into the preseason, as if they want to make bowl season happen, winning those road games against Kent State, UMass, and Eastern Michigan, I think, in my personal opinion, does have to be a must. But now we get ourselves going here in the top five, and we start talking about teams that I think are more than likely actually going to be a part of bowl season, as we now go into Northern Illinois, who is going to enjoy its last season in the MAC. They are going to be departing for the Mountain West after this year, chasing a bigger TV deal, but more travel in the process, at least in my opinion. So Northern Illinois, as for the team itself, they're only returning a small handful of starters, but Thomas Hammock knows how to make things shake in terms of getting that massive upset last season against Notre Dame, which is one of the more iconic upsets from the previous college football season. This year, he's going to have a deep backfield that's going to be headlined by a free-headed monster and Telly Johnson, Jalen Poe, and Romel Ware. There's certainly some fun pieces to this Northern Illinois backfield that's going to make sure that at least the floor of this team is going to be considerably higher than most of the conference. And it's because of that same backfield as well, where they could possibly be a dark horse in its final year in the MAC. And that's why I have them going as high as possibly 8-4. And I think they're capable of taking down Miami, which that would be a very good achievement in my opinion. But, a couple of toss-ups in there as well, besides the Miami matchup in conference play. They do go on the road against Eastern Michigan. Again, Chris Creighton versus Thomas Hammock. I think that's going to be a fun coaching matchup to watch in MACtion, especially it's a middle-of-the-week game, so that there will be more eyeballs on this particular game. And then in non-conference play, you have San Diego State at home, a team that, you thought you were going to possibly have as a conference mate next year, but San Diego State leaving the Mountain West to join the Pac-12. So it's a case of old Mountain West versus new Mountain West. Thought it would be kind of fun, but it's a toss-up game for me as well. In reality, I think that this is a team that's going to win two of those three toss-ups that I mentioned. As long as they win at least one, they'll be a bowl team, whether it is, beating San Diego State, Miami, or at Eastern Michigan. As long as you win one of those games, we will be seeing Northern Illinois participate in bowl season. But for the next few teams that I have on my MACtion Power Rankings list, these teams are going to have more expectations than that, obviously, as we get into number 4, and that's the Buffalo Bulls. Now, even though I have them starting out at number 4, I actually really like how this schedule shapes out for Buffalo. Yes, they are going to play up against at least 2 of the top 3 teams in the MAC, at least in my opinion. But the good news is for Buffalo, you do get both of those games at home. You have Miami at home, And then you have the Ohio Bobcats at home as well, which I think is going to be really valuable with Buffalo kind of being in a further echelon, and especially with it being a little bit colder up there. Plus, it doesn't hurt to have Pete Lambeau, who has done a tremendous job in improving the caliber of this program as he embarks on another year. He's at a point where this was a team that did some good work in 2024, but now he's going to have one of the most experienced teams in the conference, and I think they might mess around and play in the MAC title game. If I were to choose right now, I think we would, in fact, see Buffalo play for a MAC championship. I think that highly of Buffalo, even though I don't have them as highly ranked as the big three that I'll talk about shortly. Really, how this season goes hinges on the growth of Taquan Robertson, who transfers in from Kansas State in order to be your starting quarterback. I think that's a real important piece here, but there is certainly a capability if the Taquan Robertson can show some serious growth, and I think he will, that Buffalo could put itself in a position to where maybe they could potentially compete for a CFP spot. I think they're going to be that good, and I think that's evident by the 11-1 record that I do have for the Buffalo Bulls. The UConn game that they have in non-conference play, I think will be really intriguing as well. UConn, I think, is going to be a slightly better team, but at the same token, though, I also believe that they could win that game too because of the fact that they are at home, but I don't roll out the idea of them losing that. And what if Taquan Robertson doesn't really grow as a quarterback prospect? They could kind of stay neutral in terms of the growth stiffing up a little bit, and they revert back to more of an 8-4, 9-3, which is still a really good year. But maybe not the year that you're completely hoping for. I think if you are a Buffalo fan, you should expect much more than just your typical 7 to 8 wins, because I think they're that capable. Aside from the Minnesota game that they initially have in week 1, I think Buffalo will be favored in every other game that they play in this year. I truly believe that. So Buffalo, yes, I have them number 4 starting out, but definitely don't be surprised if we do end up seeing this Bulls team playing for a MAC title at the end of the year. Now, speaking of those MAC titles, Ohio is certainly going to have something to say about it as my 3rd best team in the conference, in my opinion. This is a team that is your defending MAC champions after they beat Miami of Ohio in the conference title game last year. But there is going to be some changes in this program as you do see Tom Ablin leave and take the head coaching job down in Charlotte. A little bit of a surprise in my opinion that he would leave such a stable program in Ohio to really take on the challenge of rebuilding Charlotte, or I guess building Charlotte, because Charlotte has never really been relevant since they joined the FBS, aside for EA college football rebuilds. But back to the task at hand, Parker Navarro is going to be back. He's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the conference, but there is some question marks on this team, which is why I have them as my 3rd best team, and maybe someone that doesn't have as high of a ceiling as a Buffalo that we just talked about, because they do have some question marks on the offensive line, as well as throughout the defense, which I'm not going to say their weaknesses, but there's certainly question marks that if they're not addressed properly during summer and fall camp, this could ultimately prevent Ohio from pulling off that conference title repeat, which, again, with the resources being so similar across the board in this conference, that really that's why it's so difficult to repeat as conference champion. It's difficult anywhere, but specifically in the MAC. So I still think this is going to be a really good team. It's hard to be bad when you have Parker Navarro. He knows how to maximize the offensive scheme. Definitely will give that to him. And this is a team that I still have ranked in the top 100. Don't get me wrong. It's just schedule isn't as favorable. You do have to go on the road against Buffalo. Buffalo, a very good team. You do also have Miami of Ohio that could certainly swing in both directions as well. So definitely a possibility of going 9-3. Be a very special year still, but maybe not a team that maybe isn't as capable as a Buffalo or a Miami or even a Toledo, which those 3 teams I think I think that would be like the tier 1 in terms of conference contenders, and Ohio being a strong tier 2, very strong tier 2, but a very stable team. I don't think there's going to be a dramatic fall off, but certainly some more questions. And I guess the next couple of teams that we have on this list, which is going to surprise you when you see the record prediction for this next team, for the Miami Redhawks, who are my second best team in the conference. You see a record prediction of 6-6, being worse than an Ohio or a Buffalo or even a Northern Illinois. But let's walk the dog real quick, and let me hear me out before you go ahead and spew some angry comments down below, right? So yes, I do understand DeQuan Finn is back. He returns back to action after spending last season at Baylor. Was originally at Toledo before even leaving for Baylor. And I think that's going to be extremely helpful in terms of hiding the overall roster overhaul that's currently taking place on the rest of the roster. I also understand that Chuck Martin, he's a proven winner. He'll find a way to keep the Redhawks in the MAC title hunt, even with a more difficult conference schedule. And the schedule is actually going to be somewhat difficult, one of the more difficult ones in the entire conference. Just a bad scheduling break for the Miami Redhawks, frankly. So in non-conference play, I know you have an FCS team, I'm pretty sure. Most schools do, but you also play against Wisconsin and Rutgers, and you can't necessarily count on Miami winning those two games. So I'm not even, I'm writing those L's in pen, to be honest. But then you also have UNLV coming into your home building as well. UNLV, I think, is a tougher team, but because they're at home, I do think at least the Red Hawks would have a shot, but I think UNLV would be favored, so that's 3 losses right there. And then I don't even get into the fact that you have Toledo at home. Toledo, minor spoiler because I haven't talked about them yet, but they're my best team in the conference. You have Buffalo on the road, and then you also play at Ohio too. So there is a fair number of landmines, more landmines than your usual top of the conference. When I looked through the schedule, before I even looked through the schedule, I was actually very surprised to have them at 6-6. I didn't think I would get to this conclusion, but between those landmines, and they also have Northern Illinois on the road. That's a sneaky good team. We talked about them earlier as a potential dark horse too. So I think there is a world where, you lose all 5 of those toss-up games I just mentioned, plus the Wisconsin and Rutgers game, and they could miss out on a bowl game entirely. Now, do I think that should happen? No, even though my record prediction is a little bit closer to the low end of things. I do think it's possible that they do come out on top of all those games I just mentioned, minus Rutgers and Wisconsin, obviously, and they're back in the MAC title game once again under Chuck Martin. But I just want you guys to understand that this is genuinely the most difficult schedule in the MAC that Miami is gonna have the misfortune of dealing with. And don't just take my word for it. Go and look at FanDuel right now. Ohio, Buffalo, and Toledo all have higher over-unders. And I really want to harp on Ohio and Buffalo. They have higher overs than the Miami Redhawks do. Oh, excuse me. Even though Miami probably would be seen as the better team than Ohio and Buffalo. And that's really because of that schedule that I just mentioned. So, 6-6 sounds crazy, but you really break it down, it's not the craziest thing in the world, in my opinion. We'll see how that plays out. It could be one of those takes where, you look like a genius if you're right on it, but if it doesn't turn out that way, I mean, it could absolutely backfire too. That's certainly a possibility. But now we get to the number 1 team in the MAC. We now get into the Toledo Rockets, which, side note, Toledo has been a fun team to build in EA College Football 26, man. I've been having some fun rebuilding Toledo. But for the actual real-life team, Tucker Gleason is back. He's ready to run the show. But they've also worked pretty hard in transfer portal in order to address a rushing attack that, let's be honest, underachieved a little bit last fall. So Tucker Gleason is going to have, at least on the offensive side of the ball, a better supporting cast than what he experienced last year. A little bit more balance so that teams cannot key in on the arm of Tucker Gleason, which, may I remind you, is not exactly a dynamic athlete. He's more of a pocket passing quarterback. So he's not someone that is going to be as likely to create with his legs as maybe a Daquan Finn, for example. So you have an experienced quarterback. You actually have one of the best transfer portal hauls in this entire conference to address the rushing attack. Defense should be solid as well, with a lethal combination of talent and experience, and that could be applied across the board too with that offense. I really do believe it's MAC title or bust for Jason Candle's team. This is a team that I do have as the best team in the conference, and I feel pretty comfortable in saying that now. And I think this is also a team that could really do something special this year, win 11 games. The Kentucky game, I mean, I have that in pen as a loss, but even the Kentucky game, because of kind of how down Kentucky football has been the last couple of years, Toledo winning that game, especially after what they did to Mississippi State last year, it would surprise me, but it wouldn't shock me, right? Now, there's a couple of other toss-ups that could potentially revert to maybe Toledo disappointing a little bit, and that is they do go on the road to play Washington State. That is a cross-country trip. I do think Toledo is a better team than Washington State, but you know, when you're making a road trip all the way across the country to play a football game, you never know how teams can react. Usually, teams that travel across the country to play a game usually don't end up covering. So that is something to watch there, even though Washington State may struggle in its own right. And then you play Miami on the road. That could really turn into a pivotal matchup to decide who does end up going to the MAC championship. So a lot of regular season implications potentially riding on that one as well. But you know, Toledo, I think, is going to be a really special team. If I really took a look at the entire G5 landscape, it's like a top 5 or a top 10 type of team. I think it's going to be really good what they have going on over there. But yeah, man, Toledo is going to be my number one team. And that's going to wrap things up here in terms of the 50,000 feet perspective of the MAC deep dive, as we go ahead and look forward to what we got going on in terms of, you know, only a few other conferences left before our 2025 preseason deep dive series is completed. Definitely let me know what you think down in the comments. Do I have a certain team too high? Do I have a team too low? Definitely let me know down below. Definitely love hearing your thoughts, as this is the first series that I've brought to life here on College Football Red Zone. If you enjoyed the MAC breakdown specifically, also let me know that by going ahead and hitting that like button. It warms up my cold dead heart, as well as let me know that the hours of work that did go in to putting together the record predictions of all 136 teams, as well as the initial preseason rankings. Those are appreciated. So hitting my like button would really make me feel good, and I would truly appreciate that. And shoot, you know, you have a real opportunity to be an A1 since day one. We're growing here on the channel, but you still have an opportunity to really be an A1 since day one, man. So if you want to do that, definitely hit that subscribe button. We have some amazing things planned in the fall in terms of College Football Red Zone itself when week number 1 comes around, so you don't want to miss that. But with that being said, I'm your host, Jake of College Football Red Zone, signing off. But hope you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.